Okay, so this is a copy of a drawing made by a kid in medieval Russia, almost 800 years ago. But not on paper, originally, on birch bark. And it's not just one drawing either, it's a lot of them. And it's the oldest set of children's drawings recovered anywhere in the world. In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that kid and his world. And I also actually made some of this paper that they wrote on in medieval Russia 800 years ago. And we're going to get into that as well. But first, I want to talk a little bit about this kid's world, his universe. Where did he live? Where did he grow up? Who was he? So turn the clock back 800 years ago. Right? Maybe more, maybe 1,000 years ago, right? Let's go back 1,200 years ago, 9th century medieval Russia. Of course, at the time, it wasn't Russia. It was a federation of states called the Kievan Rus. It was a collection of these different states in the area that is now Western Russia and a little bit of Eastern Europe as well. And so one of these states went by the name of Novgorod. And as the centuries went on into the 10th century, 11th century, Novgorod got more and more prosperous, driven by a bunch of things, but in particular the fur trade. And Novgorod eventually split off from this kingdom, the Kievan Rus, and so Novgorod kind of became its own independent republic, right? Centered with its capital city on Novgorod. You know, and part of the reason for this was just economically how powerful the city was, right? We know from archaeology, they were great with iron tools, with jewelry, with weapons. So Novgorod kind of became like this really rich, powerful, independent city-state in what we know today as modern day Russia. And it was really important from, let's say, the 11th century to around the 15th century. It gets conquered in 1478, and so it sort of loses its importance and gets forgotten by the modern world. But that's actually, for our story today, that's really important, because what happens is, as a result, as a consequence, it actually ends up preserving a lot of really important stuff. For example, if you look at pictures of modern day Novgorod, you can see the old city walls, old buildings of modern day Novgorod sort of untouched by the waves of development that would, later characterize Europe and Asia. But for our story today, and for our young protagonist, it's actually a good thing, because it means that archaeologists in the 20th century were able to go back and do a lot of digging in this really well-preserved city. Not only were the buildings preserved, but the soil underneath is great for preserving something that was very common in these times, which was, again, birch bark. Birch bark, organic material, the soil, which is very humid and also lacked oxygen, which actually ended up being able to preserve organic materials like birch bark very well. In this region of Russia, and still today, you can find forests of birch bark, of white birch bark trees. There are these beautiful white trees that have this bark that just kind of like peels off and sloughs off. This bark also has another very interesting property, which is that it turns out you can write on it. It's a very soft and pliable bark, and if you peel it off, you can write on it with a stylus. And they've actually excavated dozens of these beautiful styluses that they use for writing in Novgorod. Modern paper production techniques were a much later innovation, and paper was very expensive back in the time. Other writing materials as well, like vellum, which people wrote on animal skin back then, were also extremely expensive. But the cool thing about birch bark is that in this area of Russia, it was everywhere, just forests and forests of birch bark. So people were able to just go in, take the birch bark they wanted, and you have paper that you could write on. It wasn't clear to me actually how they did it, so I tried making some myself. You can buy birch bark on Amazon, strangely. But you can get these squares of birch bark. Scholars talk about how they actually prepared it. They boiled it. So I tried doing that. It curls up, but once it curls up, you kind of open it up. You can peel off different layers, and you end up with these soft pieces of birch bark. So when you write on this birch bark, it does make some very clear marks. And the people of the time just used lots of birch bark for writing. So back in the 50s, archaeologists started doing some excavations around Novgorod, and they just started pulling up piles of these documents, of these birch bark documents, of these little strips of paper. And now we have over 1,000 of these things. Are called beresta in Russian. These documents just reflect a wide stretch of society. We're finding documents written by women, documents written by peasants, documents written by children. So what we're finding is that literacy in the population was widespread. It wasn't just restricted to the ruling class. And that's fascinating, because within this city we're able to see what the average everyday person was thinking about all kinds of stuff, right? So we have this treasure trove of modern day notes that people would pass around in class, or modern day text messages, or modern day stuff that you would write on a sticky, right? We have hundreds of these documents preserved from ancient medieval Russia, going back to as early as the 12th century. I want to bring up some of these documents that I thought were really interesting. There's a database online where you can go and actually look at, you can just kind of scroll through and to see all the documents they have pulled up. They were all originally written in a dialect of Old Slavonic, which became modern day Russian, called Old Novgorod. But in this database, you can find translations of all these into Russian, but if you use Google Translate, you can get them in English. So I want to read you some of the translations of some documents that I found really interesting. So document number 9 is about a wife complaining about her husband, right? What my father gave me and my relatives gave me, the dowry, he took it. And now, marrying a new wife, he gives me nothing. Shaking hands as a sign of a new engagement, he drove me away and took the other as his wife. Come do mercy. That's from 800 years ago. No more, 900 years ago, right? This is crazy. Document number 35. Okay, this is from the 12th century. Yaakov, brother, lie down when you which is basically another way of saying quit effing around. And he actually used the F word in the equivalent in this old dialect of Russian. Document 43. This is from Boris to his wife. As soon as this letter arrives, send me a man on a stallion, because I have a lot of work here. And send a shirt. I forgot a shirt. I mean, isn't this great? Isn't this great? You're just seeing what people thought. 377. This is really interesting. This is from the 13th century as well. From Mikita to Ulyanitsa. Marry me. I want you and you want me. Ignato is witness to this. A marriage proposal written on birch bark. Isn't that crazy? I think really the most fascinating thing in these documents are these strips of birch bark we've pulled up that contain drawings from this kid, this schoolboy, whose name was Onfime. Let me just share with you some of these drawings, which are just amazing. So if we take a look at document number 200, we see a little guy on some kind of horse, right? Standing up on a horse, he's got a sword, and he's got a lance just plowing into somebody's face. And to the right of this guy, his legs, we have the word written in Old Novgorod, Onfim, you know? So we know his name, and we see this also in some other documents as well. So we know his name was Onfim. But right above him to the upper right-hand corner is the alphabet, right? So you can picture this kid, you know, scholars think he was probably 6 or 7 years old just based on the style of drawings. But think of this kid doing these, like writing out the alphabet for his schoolwork. While he's writing, he kind of gets bored and starts doodling himself, just lancing somebody in the face. Take a look at document 206. These are syllables that he's writing out in the language of the time. Plus Bible verses, which was also part of the homework that they did then, apparently. And then below it, he just kind of gets bored of writing out Bible verses and draws what one scholar characterizes as himself and a bunch of his little friends. I mean, look at these, right? They're just fascinating. Now, not all of these documents are signed Onfim, but we know that they're all from the same author, both based on the style of drawing, but also based on the fact that we actually found all of these documents in the same place. When scholars did these excavations in the 50s, they found a whole pile of these drawings in one place, preserved in the mud. He's just running through the forest with these birch barks, and then he drops them in the mud, and they get preserved for all of history. 199 is a really interesting document because in a lot of the documents you just see his schoolwork, and usually it's not his actual writing, like usually it's not his thoughts. But in this one we have a record of some of his thoughts, which is just fascinating. So if you look at this, it's some kind of animal, but the writing though is the fascinating part. The writing right through the animal, he writes, "I am a beast." So he's picturing himself as the animal, right? He's not even doing his schoolwork anymore. He's picturing himself, and he was literate. This 6-year-old kid was able to, from 13th century Russia, was able to write. And then above it, and this is one really fascinating thing, it says greetings from Onfim to Danilo, which we assume was his friend or maybe his brother. This is almost the equivalent of like writing a note that you're passing to somebody in class. You know, we have document 202. It's so interesting, right? We don't know, you know, on the left we have these are spelling lessons he's writing out. He's copying from some passage. On the right, we don't really know what that is. It looks like two people. One of them maybe has a beard. Some people think these are his parents, but we don't know, right? We don't really have any record of who these people were. We have another drawing from him that may also represent his parents. There's no text with this one. It's just a drawing. It's a little kid and I've heard some suggestions that it's his dad, which is really sweet if true. But just look at like the people, you know, like this is so characteristic of what a 6-year-old boy would draw today.
I mean, I just want to know what they're holding in their hands. Are those leaves? Are those bugs? I mean, this one looks like toilet paper, kind of.
And the way, like document 210, like the way he draws these things are just fascinating, right? Like this is the tall legs, the little round body, the funny facial expressions. It's just so interesting. We also have a lot of miscellaneous drawings that are preserved without any kind of words. They're just little doodles. And it's interesting to kind of think about the themes that he was writing on. I mean, we have a lot of these where, you know, their people are shooting arrows at each other. There are these people with these very strange expressions. We don't really know what those are, but he liked people on horses. He liked battle scenes. He liked horses. He liked armor. He liked fighting. You know, and you might think, oh, this maybe is a reflection of his violent society. I think more likely it's just you know what any 6-year-old boy would like to draw. I mean, I probably drew stuff like this when I was 7. To me, the most fascinating of these documents really is 203. You know, it's picturing some kind of person facing off against this thing, this like, to me it looks like a Medusa type creature with some kind of snake or like a tail or something. It's not really clear what this actually is, but the beautiful and the touching part about this document, this isn't an exercise that he's writing out. The text says, "Lord, help your servant Onfim." I just find that so beautiful. He's picturing himself battling somebody else. We don't know if he's the one facing off against the beast, or if he is the beast, we don't know. But he's beseeching the Lord for help, and it's just so beautiful to have this kid's record from the year 1250. If you liked the video, please remember to give me a like and subscribe, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye bye. So, I'm gonna leave. Hello? I'm gonna leave my little document here in the ground, and maybe someday somebody will find it.